Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to the Lifetime Talks Training Podcast. And I've got a good friend, a guy that has taught me so much, has been able to work on me. I remember in those stairs in San Diego and you just taking my calf to town one day. The guy used to actually massage horses, right? So we've got Ian O'Dwyer. He's co-founder of the Soma. He was co-founder of PTAG Global, Odeon Movement. He's been, teaching trainers at a high level for many, 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 many years. And I can't thank you for, being on the show and welcome you to the show, man.
Jace, it's so good to speak to you, to see you again. It's that whole thing where our industry, we're always so busy going somewhere to do something, brother, we don't get a chance to actually just stop and talk. Well, we were lucky enough that we actually could have a few beers and have a few laughs along the way. And that was, I think, the best part of it, mate, because we start to understand that if it's those times that we actually start to really learn and share and get the gold nuggets out, right?
Yeah, that's it. Well, I want to jump right in. And today's episode is really about you guys being able to, as trainers or as high-end fitness enthusiasts, being able to take away some good mobilization techniques and stuff that you can do yourself to help some of the more common, aches and pains that we have, so that hinder us in our movement. So why don't you first start? Where did Soma come from, and how did you start that?
Well, mate, that's God. I don't know if I can remember back that far. Yeah. So predominantly, I was an or a semi-professional sportsman, mate. And as you and I have both discussed, we've looked at the body from the nerve, muscle, bone principle for many, many years. And I guess when we look at how we conditioned horses were very much about understanding the connection, the humility, their motion. But when you look at horses are this 1,200-pound animal that hit the ground, and when you look at their leg is half the width of my forearm, and yet from a knee down on a horse there's no muscle, it's only fascia. So that sort of blows your mind a bit, because you sort of go, as an athlete, we're talking nerve, muscle, bone, no one's even talking tendon or fascia, and we're talking about making these muscles stronger, yet we're not talking about attenuating forces in three-dimensional motion. So there was a bit of confusion, there was a bit of incongruity in my mind when I started getting into the industry. So Soma really is just the coming together of the concepts of asking questions. Because when I looked at how we conditioned athletes in my sport, which was Aussie rules, it's that crazy game that's, you jump, kick, twist, turn in any direction.
For those in the US, that's rugby.
So it's funny, mate, because training didn't represent anything like how we moved. So for me, we had to go back and look at, okay, let's understand motion. Well, horses gave me that ability to understand motion, because when you look at a horse and you look at the rhythm and timing, and you look at what each leg, what their tail, what their head does, and it's everything in between, right? So when you look at a human, they're pretty much the same. You'll see that when they're moving, their head's pretty stationary, but their feet and their arms are what are creating this spatial awareness and what happens in between that area. So for us, really Soma, because Soma is an acronym for self, osteo, looking at the bony sections, myofascial, obviously muscle and fascia, application. So really all we are is a self-care tissue management system that allows people to move optimally, to feel optimally, and to live the quality of life that they want to live.
I love it, man. I love it. And so you've got these, what you call self-applied applications. And these are some of the things. Obviously you have a huge extensive course that is, really cool. We'll get into the details of that later, but can you take us through kind of what each one of these things are, and then give some, maybe one or two examples, of how to use that application into, whether it's lumbopelvic, hip, neck, shoulder, some of the more common injury pain areas.
So Jace, let's just sort of step back a little bit further. And this is the way that I guess that I've evolved, and, Rodney and how he moves and thinks and grooves. And, it's been nice because I'm the practical guy, and to have a guy like Rodney who has this systematic approach of being able to apply things.
And real quick, sorry to interrupt, but those that our one Rodney Korn is another co-founder with OD,
Yep.
and he was with NESM and helped develop the OPT model, and then PTA
Absolutely.
Global. I believe he's with Elenco now, and then obviously
Yep.
doing Soma
Yep.
with you.
He's an amazing guy, amazing friend, amazing colleague, and it's, mate, when we're talking about concepts, you've got to be able to apply them first. Research and development, if you want to call that, and then we get a chance to sit down and talk them through and see what happens. And it was quite interesting because way back in 2002, when I first went to the States with PTN, Personal Training on the Net with Richard Boyd, and of course I met Scott Hobson and Bobby Capuccio and Michelle Delcourt and Rodney Korn, and then you're exposed to blokes like Tom Purvis, who you've just had on recently, all these amazing minds of the industry, Mike Clark. And it was really interesting because at that stage I'd come out of the sporting industry and I got really quite sick of just going to the gym, and I started to bring in play in 2006. So of course we're coming to the States and people are saying, so why do you want to teach trainers how to play? And I said, well, I've been a client and going to the gym bores the crap out of me. So I wanted to be able to do something that could facilitate a three-dimensional response. I could make it more enjoyable. I could create a hormonal response, but in a manner in which it looked like what it was going to be like. So anyway, people caught on, they took it in and they play with it. And then of course, 2009, Dr. Stuart Brown comes out and says, play is a crucial part of our neuroscience makeup. Mammals need it, blah, 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 blah. There's all these positives to it, especially as we age. And it was kind of funny because my wife said to me, you're amazing. Like you take a concept, but you don't care about the science and research because you observe the client in front of you. And yet the science and research team seems to find you, right? So one of the concepts, I'd gone to the States and, Clarkey was doing self-myofascial release back in those days in 2002. And I brought it back to Australia and I started using it with my clients. And it was funny, Jace, because what happened was the more I used the roller, the greater the results, but the more the clients hated it because it was too painful, right? Yeah. It was just too painful. Yeah. So I sort of said to myself, all right, hang on, this isn't working, right? Because they love it, but they hate it. They love it, but they hate it. And it certainly wasn't part of their session that they enjoyed. So I said, you know what, I'm going to eliminate it. So what I did was, from my own gut instinct, was I noticed that when we started to work, and remembering I do a lot of body work as well, Jay. So when you touch someone, I feel it's an unfair advantage. When you touch their skin, you get to feel their tension, the texture, what the temperature of the skin is. Yep. And what I noticed was the more I started working in the bony sections, the easier the tissue started to change. The more I worked in the bony sections, the easier the tissues started to change.
So, 1 second. So when you say bone, what do you mean by that, or the bony areas?
So let's go back to the tissues, and we talk about it from field Soma, the tissues rather than just nerve, muscles, or bones, right? Because when we look at it, nerve, muscle, bone, fascia, which encapsulates every one of those tissues, and skin are all 70% water. They all have a neural response and they all have a mechanical response. But then we talk about blood and lymph. Well, blood's 92% water and lymph's 96% water. Those 7 components are all tissues, and they're all necessary tissues for everything to work. So when we talk about the bone, we're talking about the skeletal system. But when we look at the skeletal system, every part of the skeletal system is wrapped in periosteum, which is fascia, which then runs into tendon, which is fascia, which then encapsulates or invagulates muscle, which is more fascia. So everywhere there's blood, there's fascia. Sorry, everywhere there's blood, there's lymph. Everywhere there's lymph, there's nerve. So you've got this intertwined section that when you went and looked at the bony structures, and the bony structures to me are the foot, 33 of those little suckers down there. And then you look at the knee, really quite a bony structure. Then you go to the pelvis. And it's interesting, the pelvis is a really bony structure, both from an anterior and a posterior perspective, that's laden with muscle. And then you come to the shoulder, what we call or term the shoulder ring, T1 to T12, which is once again a really bony structure. Now, what's quite interesting about that is that we started applying the roller in the self-myofascial release technique all those years ago. I went away from it and we started to say, okay, if we took the body and we gave it some movement around those bony structures, how would that look? And I'll give you an example, Jace. I'll stand up and just give you an understanding of what a couple of the movements may be. So if I come back over here, and a really simple way, I'll adjust that screen so everyone can see. And a really simple way is to do this. I always like to have a metric. Can you see that okay, mate?
Yep.
Perfect. So there's a couple of things you can do. For someone who hasn't got a bulging disc, you might just ask your client to roll down to where they feel the first tension in this posterior line. Now, remembering, when we talk about fluid in tissue, if 70% of your tissues, nerve, muscle, bone, skin, fascia, blood, and lymph are water, well, blood and lymph are more than that, but 70% of those tissues that we talk about are water, we're really nothing more than a fluid tension system. So in other words, if I've got a foot, it's a pretty bony structure, but it's really a narrow part of the river. Then I come into the calf complex, which is a pretty wide part of the river. And then I come into the knee, which is a narrow part of the river. And then I come into the thigh hamstring, which is a wide part of the river. And then I come into the pelvis, which is a narrow part of the river. You sort of see where I'm going with this? We've got these areas that have these big muscular tissues, but they have to pass through these bony structures. And if the tissues that pass through the bony structures aren't hydrated and can't move, they can't slide and glide the way they're designed to, we're going to have restrictions. We're going to have poor communication between those joints, which means now we're not going to have efficiency in motion. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
All right. So what we might do is, quite often, I'll just get a client to say, I want you to roll over to where you feel comfortable, to where you feel the first tension. And remembering, tension is just the first area that starts to give you a sensation or a biofeedback. That's all it is. Now, I did this at a conference that I was keynote presenting for at a conference in New Zealand, and it was quite interesting because it was an osteopathy conference, and they get fascia, they get fluid, and they get tension. So I got them to roll over, and of course, they've come back, and I said, okay, so we would typically say that is a hamstring problem or a posterior chain problem that we can't go any further. So what I would ask or invite your viewers to do now would be to do this. I'm going to use this bench just as some stability. I'm going to take my right foot forward and my right foot looks straight ahead, and I'm going to bend my right knee. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my left foot slightly in, and for some people who are externally rotated, they may not be able to do that. It may just be a foot that's straight ahead, but their rear leg is straight. In this position already, I can feel tension either in the rear calf or in the front of the hip. So the movement now is a low force, low speed movement, because I know fascia, which is what I'm trying to affect here, the bony structures, remembering the bones are covered in periosteum. So there's lots of really dense areas of fascial tissue. I know that it is a force mitigator. So the more I try and force it, the stiffer it gets and the less you'll move, so it can put and share the force on, right? So if I have low speed, I've got low stress. If I've got low force, I've got low stress. So now the tissue wants to give. Now I'm starting to pump, right? And I can then take my arm up, which now creates a bigger extensibility in through the rib cage. And then I might even take my arm up and just gently take my hip out. Now, once again, I can really start to feel the effect in through that bony structure of the lateral hip. Now, interestingly enough, if I then ask you to revisit the movement, the body just wants to yield and give you more motion.
Wow. And so you got that motion through, again, for those that are just listening, you're not going to be able to see, go to the YouTube page and watch it, but they're very, very subtle motions that you've got. Very subtle motion into internal rotation, and then very, very subtle motion into, we'll call it forward movement.
Yeah, just a sagittal or a forward and back movement. Now, so what's interesting, Jace, think about it. And we were saying before, a lot of the information that we're seeing in the industry is stretch hard, jump high, run fast, lift heavy. Yet we can't get back into fundamental movement patterns. So there's an old saying, if we can't breathe, we can't move. If we can't move, we can't load. Now, the interesting thing is that movement that we just did, and I hope your people go back and have a look at the YouTube, because that will improve their breathing. That will improve the connection between their big toe, their pelvic floor, their diaphragm, the periocardium of their heart and lung, and their tongue and hyoid. So that's what we call the deep front line. That's called basically the deep core. So if we can't connect that line of tissue, then when we go to move, we're going to have a suboptimal movement pattern. If I move a suboptimal movement pattern, I'm going to get back pain, knee pain, shoulder pain, some sort of discomfort somewhere. And that pain will generally come from the lack of fluid flow or the lack of tissue motion because it's dehydrated or it's stuck or whatever it may be in certain areas.
Well, and again, you've got the experience with this. I'm looking at this and saying, especially some of the, pro athletes or whatnot. I mean, all athletes at all different levels of the way that they're preparing themselves for movement could be the very reason why they're getting and why there's so many more non-contact, injuries that are happening right now.
So we talk about tissue, and you and I have had this discussion, over the years. The more we try and create an exclusivity in our bodies, the more we try and exclusively make the glutes the focus or the hamstrings the focus or the quads the focus or the chest the focus, the more problems we seem to drive into the human being. And I believe realistically, when we start to talk about this, mate, that's why I look at the human being and not the human body. Like we talk about, that's a movement that every human being can do, whether you're a kid with a learning disability, whether you're an aged person who is on a walking frame, or whether you're an elite athlete. It's something that changes the tissue instantly. That's the thing I love. That's not me telling them to do it and then see, this is what you're going to know. It's not about knowing. It's about what do you feel after it. So can you imagine, Jace, I go into this osteopathy conference. They introduce me as a person who grew up with horses, is an ex-semi-professional footballer, and is a plumber. Can you imagine 150 osteopaths going, what the hell is this guy going to do?
He's got strong hands.
All of a sudden, you've got 150 of these people doing a forward flexion, a forward bend, and then they've done the mobilizer, the self-fascial mobilizer, and like their jaws just dropped. Because as I said to them, when I'm the person who's been to the allied health professional, and that's what I was, I spent a lot of my years doing that, as you have done, and all I got was a system or a pattern that kept me going around and around and didn't break the pattern, then we weren't looking at the problem, we were looking at the symptom. So if we're not addressing the human being and we're addressing the human body, we're missing lots of stuff.
Wow. And so that what you just showed us, you've got 4 self-applied applications: self osteofascial engagement, self fascial mobilizer, self myofascial engagement, and then self isometric activation. What did you just show there?
That was the self fascial mobilizer.
Okay.
So what we might do now is we might go into and have a look at the bony structures with a roller, because this is something that's very different. So we talk about self osteofascial engagement, and the reason we talk about or use the word engagement rather than the word release is because there's no science research anywhere in the world that says you can release tissue. There's no science anywhere in the world that says you can free tissue. So rather than us get into a confrontation with pain specialists, with physios, we want to work with people. We want this to be something that adds on to their programming. So rather than having a confrontation, part of the Soma system is what we call the lead system. Listen to the client, listen to the tissue, engage the client, engage the tissue, appraise the outcome of what you've just seen and what they've felt, and then design a solution. So engagement is what we do. When we take a movement, we're going to engage the client into a motion. We're going to engage the client into some sort of response that's going to send a neural response. It's going to send a mechanical response, but it's also going to send a fluid response. And that fluid response, we believe, is a big missing key of why tissues lose their ability to be able to adapt when it comes to multi-directional motion.
Wow. And before you show the roller, there's obviously schools of thought out there that I think more now than I've seen, than ever, kind of saying it's a useless piece of equipment.
Yeah, of course there is.
And how, again, I always say there's no such thing as a useless piece of equipment. It's the application of the piece of equipment that becomes useless or not. Correct. Any quick tips on, with the way that you guys use it, why it's more effective?
Firstly, let's understand this. I believe, and Rodney believes, the reason that people struggle with most tools is that they don't understand what the tool and how the tool is affecting the body.
Mhm.
Now, Jace, we have we have what we call a biofeedback system that's constantly giving our body information. How many people would listen to that biofeedback? And if they do, what do they do with it? So we've gone through a process 22 years ago when I was first starting to do this stuff. We were a very evidence-based practice, right? We had to have science and research to show us that this is what happens when we did certain things. Well, guess what, mate? I've had this studio now for 22 years. Every time I went down the evidence-based practice route, I got no results. I got no solutions. And guess what that did for my clients? It broke their confidence and it broke their ability to connect to me. So what I had to do was exactly what I do with a horse. I would have a look at their movement. Now, with a horse, you can't ask them what they're feeling, but with a human, you can. And what I've learned with, and you, mate, you've worked with some of the best in the world.
Yeah.
We learn their assessments, right? Whether it's Gary Gray, Ray Cook, Mike Clark, whoever it may be, you learn some of their assessments and they're amazing. But at the end of the day, I can't see what they see. I can't do what they do.
Mhm.
More importantly, I'm with my client 1 hour a week. What happens to the other 167 hours that they're by themselves?
Yeah.
So what we try and do is create a movement pattern that they can recognize what's happening in the tissues. They can feel tension. Now, that's a really interesting word because it's not as though you're saying, this is tight, that's weak, that needs stretching. No. I just want you to go to where you feel the first restriction or tension in your tissue. Then we apply, whether it's breath, whether it's a roller, because trust me, what's the two biggest things selling in the world now? Breath work. Where's the research around breath work? Well, there is research there, but trust me, breath work's a very individual thing, right?
Yeah.
And vibration, like vibration plates have been laughed at for years, and yet now we've got theraguns, we've got vibration balls, we've got all these things that really don't have the science and research, but people feel better after using them.
Yep.
So really what it's got to get back to is understanding the tissue's roles. And if you understand what the tissue's roles are, then you can understand what the tool is. Is a straight-legged sit-up a bad exercise? It's not if that's what the person has to do in some sort of way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So for the people who bag them, I just feel their evidence-based perspective is very much around a very narrow perspective. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm the person who's been broken. You're the person who's been broken. All I know is our industry looks at it from a neural perspective and a mechanical perspective. No one has ever talked to me about the fluid response in tissue. And if you want to go back and have a look at the research of where there's plenty, nerve, muscle, bone, fascia, and skin, 70+% water, common sense has got to tell you that there's got to be a fluid response, right?
Yep.
You know, there's 6 liters of blood and 14 liters of interstitial fluid of lymphatic. 20 liters of fluid that flows in your body, has got to be a fluid response, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, that's common sense. That's not even a discussion. Now what we've got to do is, all I've learned is, it doesn't matter what I know. It matters what they feel. It matters what they feel. If they feel a change, then that's what they're going to do when they leave this studio, because they feel that that's been a positive. People come into me and talk about being broken. I don't do an assessment, Jace. Why? Because they've already been emotionally crucified by other allied health professionals. I work on what they can do, not what they can't do.
Yep.
I'm not saying assessments or appraisals are incorrect. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, if I want the human being to walk away with a positive outcome, then they've got to feel something that allows them to improve.
And I think, I've said this many times, I think as trainers, the professional trainers that really go down the rabbit hole, whether, whomever that is, or in a combination of people, they're always holding themselves up against the people that they're learning from, which is a super high standard. But yet the people that we're actually working with, I always say they want what we forgot about 5 years ago.
Correct.
And we have to understand that we want to, whether it's an ego thing or whether it's a thing of, I need to differentiate myself from other people in and around where I'm working or other trainers because it's a populated space. I get those things, but at the end of the day, the people who connect with their clients the best, who get them to feel, like you said, better when they're done.
Yep.
those are the people that are going to be they're going to have longer tenured clients. Let's just say that, and more referrals.
More longevity, more sustainability, more success. And Jace, I'll challenge your listeners to do this. They'll listen to this conversation today. Tom was on recently. Bobby's been on. Go back and re-listen to those conversations now, because you know what? You made a really powerful statement. People want to know what we forgot 5 years ago. Now, if you went back and revisited Lifetime Talks and Training and some of those conversations now, and we put them into context, like Tom's got some of the most amazing knowledge I've ever heard. Now, at the time when I first heard him, I thought, well, hang on, where does that fit in function? But it's not about function. It's about the human being, right? It's about listening to his brilliance of how this all works, whether it's him or Greg Roscoff or Scott Hobson or whoever it may be. They've got these amazing tools and this amazing perspective and vision. We can all learn from them, but sometimes we've got to go back and re-listen to these podcasts and these interviews, because that's where the real gold nuggets are.
Well, and the other thing to add on to that is just, again, this is just gold for people that are just coming up and starting to really engage in learning and bettering their craft. There's so much noise in your head when you're learning something new, because you're trying to remember, all these different things and sound bites that you don't actually get anything, right? You get the sound bites. And when that noise lessens and you come back to that same content, you're like, I don't even remember them saying that. Exactly, because there's too much noise, especially when you buy books. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I remember buying Porterfield and DeRosa books, the mechanical low back pain, neck pain, all those. And when I first started, I'm like, oh yeah, got to buy that book. And you're looking at it, and I'm like, I don't know what the hell this means. I'm going to read it. I'm going to get probably 2 things. I'll shelf it. And then, 10 years later, I come back to that same book and I'm like, oh my God, I've had this in my arsenal for so long. Again, as your level of understanding increases, you
but also too, Jace, I think for all of us, we're impatient, and as we get older, it's actually the patience that allows us to now have that wisdom, because we allow it to wash over us and we're actually okay. And I've got a saying, and sometimes it scares professionals, but my saying is, it's okay not to know. I don't know when someone comes in here, I don't know their emotional status. I don't know their mental status. I don't know how much they make. I don't know the relationships. I don't know how much sleep they've had. I don't know what they eat, what they sleep. I don't know I don't know. All I know about is that human being in front of me now. And if I can listen to them, but also listen to their tissues, and somewhere in between, there's going to be the truth. If I can engage their tissues, either in some sort of play, breathing activity, movement, some sort of roller activity, and then observe, then I can appraise what the outcome has been to create now a solution for them, whether that's one movement, whether that's a daily ritual of do this, do this, do this, whether that's just drink some more water. Now, that all sounds very basic, Jace, but
it's where we got to start. Why are we so far down to the one side? And I've always lived by that too, is the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
You don't know, brother. You don't know. And it's funny, mate, isn't it? Because the more we evolve like that, the more we tend to be open like that. It's amazing the cases that come into us. I had a lady come into me a couple of years ago, and she was 35. And I'll tell you this story, right, because it was really quite interesting. It taught me so much. Anyway, she's come in and she was on IVF to get pregnant. And this is 3 years previous. Got pregnant. 3 weeks into a pregnancy, she was paralyzed from the neck down through a flu, transverse myelitis. So the question was, is she going to have the child? Can she survive? And if she does survive, will she be able to raise the child? Long story short, she has the child, raises the child. The child's 2.5 years old now, and she's this beautiful lady. But she comes into my studio. She walks up 30 stairs, and she's still partially paralyzed. And she says to me, I've been referred by a friend. Could you help me? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, what do you do? I said, well, I work with horses. I'm an ex-semi-professional footballer and a plumber by trade. And she starts to laugh and said, you don't sell yourself very well, do you? And I said, look, I try not to put expectations into people because I don't know. But I said, the body's a pretty clever thing. If we can give it what it needs, it normally changes pretty instantly. So anyway, I said, show me your foot. So she gave me her foot, and as soon as she gave me her foot, it went into a spasticity, right? And I said, just let it go. And she said, what do you mean? I said, just let it go. So she let it go, and I just mobilized a bit, Jason. I got her to stand up, and I just got her to move sideways, just gently, just swaying sideways. Now you can imagine when there's a lack of communication in the system, that it's all over the place, right? Well, she got into this really fine lateral movement really quickly, and she was like, "What have you done?" And I said, "I don't know," because I said I can tell you what the science says, but I said there's many contributing factors I don't know about right now. So anyway, I said, look, just come and do a couple of sessions. If it works for you, great. I'm not going to charge you. If it doesn't work, great. There's no problems. She comes in for the first session. She couldn't get her left knee up to hip height. Well, in the first session, she's done it straight away. And she's just like, she's beaming, right? And I said, I forgot to ask you what you did for a living. Because normally one of my first questions is, what's your occupation? It gives me all these understandings of their patterns, right? She said, I'm a doctor of neuroscience. I've had my PhD at 24. I've been studying the brain for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like this.
Oh my goodness.
So Jace, we don't know, right? Like, here's this beautiful lady. Like, I looked after her for 18 weeks. She got her car license back. She finished up. I moved her onto the water because she wanted to run. But to see what her body could do and how it could change, and she said, Ian, we've never looked at the body like this. We just think of the brain, right? And I said, that's okay. But I said, we've got to think of everything else, because that's what we're dealing with, right? Yep. From our perspective.
Well, and before we go into a couple more examples and then wrap up, I've always said this through the 25 plus years I've been at the game. It's, if you know some things, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but if you know some things, it's much easier to get somebody to feel better in an hour than it is to get them to lose whatever amount of weight. And a lot of times when you go down and learn tools like you're explaining, and others that are out there, that is such a powerful connection that you create when you can help them. Again, you can't treat their pain, but if they get out of pain through some of the things that you're doing, it just is so much more powerful. And everybody's in it at some point in time. Everyone Correct. Is going to be there. So it dramatically opens up. And that's not putting a bag on people that are body cosmetic type people.
No.
That's hard to do. But if you're trying to find a niche, go find out some of these things that you can do and help people feel better. And they're going to come to you, or they're going to refer a lot of people to you.
And Jace, this is the thing. What I love about it, what I really love about it now is that, as I said before, it's okay not to know. Like, people come to me, and a lot of them are in some sort of discomfort or pain. Now, what's interesting about that, mate, is that if we look at fluid, and someone's got muscular pain in their back, and you look at a fluid flow, and all of a sudden you get the tissues to get a bit more hydrated, and they start to move better. If I don't get fluid flow, it's called stagnancy. Stagnancy creates tissue tension. Tissue tension creates all sorts of discomfort and pain. If I get tissue now to get less tension, more fluid flow, a lot of times discomfort decreases, and so does pain. Now, I haven't fixed anyone. I never have. You know that. But if I've now empowered them to say, do this, whether it's a roller or a ball or a movement or a breathing technique or play, get a balloon out and do it, I don't care. But if that makes them or allows them to feel better, then we're doing our job, right?
Yep.
Because we as coaches, and if you look at the definition of coach, it's not about what happened yesterday, and it's not about what's happening tomorrow. It's about this moment in time. What impact can you have on the person this moment in time?
Wow, that's great. Well, again, great tangent, but let's swing it back real quick. I mean, we could do this all day, man. You know that. Then we can have a virtual cocktail, and then it'll really go long. But so you showed a fascial mobilizer. Let's get back to again, when you say osteofascial engagement, can you give me an example of something that?
Perfect. So we're just going to take a roller, and once again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the wall over here now. Yep. If I was creating a movement for an athlete, I probably wouldn't go to the wall, because if I went to the wall, what would happen is they would be very bored, because the wall is a little bit less intense than going to the floor. So you know what an athlete likes. They like that intensity so they can feel there's a benefit, right? Yeah. So what we always do is, before we do anything, is we want to know whether there's been a change. So I'm going to create a metric. And the what metric is just a movement pattern. So I'm going to be about probably 3 inches away from the wall with my heels. I'm going to put my butt, my back, and my head on the wall. Now, it's interesting because for me, this is generally the area from working over a table in front of a computer. This will be generally the area that I'll get quite glued up in. So what I'll do is in that position now, I want to use straight arms, and I just want to take those arms up to where I feel that first restriction. And for me, it's about there. Now, it's interesting because that I can feel is sort of in that posterior rib cage. Understanding that when we, from a Feel Soma perspective, we talk about the shoulder, the pelvis, the knee, and the ankle as rings. You affect something, you affect all things. So what I'm going to do now is, for the case of this, I'm actually going to look this way. So I'm looking at the camera. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to place the roller under this lateral rib cage. I'm down about probably 4 inches from my armpit. And all I want to do now is I'm going to have my left foot and my right foot are even. And I'm just pushing with my outside leg into the wall. So I've created a pressure on the roller. Now we're on the bony section, so we don't need to be there long. So I'm going to breathe. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to roll 4 times. So up and down is 1. So once I've done 4 rolls, then I'm going to go into a shift. And the shift is when I come and I leave the location on the roller, but I'm shifting forward. So it's almost like a Chinese burn, but I'm only at an intensity that I feel comfortable with. Once again, if I was on the floor, this would be a lot more intense. So once again, up and back is 1, I'm doing 4. So once I've done 4 rolls and 4 shifts, I come off it. I give it about 5 to 10 seconds. And now I'm going to go back onto the wall. Now, quite funny because this is what blows my head. Straight away, my neck just wants to come back into that area, and it's just so much easier. And once again, I'm going to now take the arms up to where they feel comfortable. And that's further than what it was, and that's a lot more comfortable. Remembering my restriction was over here. I did the right side, and that changed it. Now,
I was just going to ask on that. Why?
Because of the fact that 1, I wanted to face the camera, and 2, I know that it's a ring, right? So if I affect this side, there's going to be effect on the other side. Now, I could go to the other side and I'd probably get an even bigger response. But this is the beautiful thing. If I've had a trauma on the left-hand side, someone's come into me, I might not want to go to that trauma site because there's an emotional response, right?
Yep.
So I could come to the front or the side or the back, whatever it may be, and get a change. But remembering, it's a roller. It's no longer than 30 seconds. So it's not self-myofascial engagement. I'm not having to be there for 90 seconds. The intensity is not anywhere near as intense. So therefore, people can breathe, 4 rolls, 4 shifts, get off, have a look, and then see how they go.
And that is, again, a self-osteofascial engagement. Is that
correct?
Something you just showed there? Beautiful.
So Jace, just for interest's sake,
yep.
Just to give people out there who are a bit if they are naysayers, I spoke before about play and the research finding me. 2019, there's some research that came out and said there's a hormone produced in the bone that creates the fight, flight, or freeze response in the body. Now, just think about that for a tick. We've been told for years that the amygdala drives a message to the adrenals, which then floods the body with cortisol, which is your fight, flight, or freeze response.
Yep.
Now there's research showing that osteocalcin, which is produced inside the bone, produces your fight, flight, or freeze response.
Oh, man. 2019.
So here we are. I started playing with the bone in 2007, and we start to see research coming out saying now, and it changes metabolic response, it changes breathing, and it changes the ability to move more efficiently. How brilliant is that when you start to see, now, do I believe for 1 minute that it's one system or the other? No, because as you and I have spoken about, the body's not that dumb, right? It combines many systems, and there's many times and many ways it can do things. But this is what I'm saying. Think about it from a perspective of protection. If the bone can produce a fight, flight, or freeze response, what does the shoulder ring protect? Heart and lungs, pretty important things. What does the cranium protect? Brain, pretty important thing. What does the pelvis protect? The visceral reproduction system, pretty important thing. What does the feet do? Allows us to escape. Yeah. All bony sections.
Interesting. Wow. Wow. And God, I just want to again make sure we get through. So most people understand them, or or have heard the self myofascial engagement or
Yep.
things like
Or
that.
release. Yep.
Is there just a couple of tips that you can say when doing that? This is what they need to do to make it effective.
First thing they've got to do is breathe.
Okay.
First thing you've got to do is breathe, Jace. Most people get on a roller and they want to move the roller fast and they just want to get on and get off. Okay.
And that's a roller, that's a Theragun, that's a whatever your device
absolutely.
is. Yep.
Absolutely. What we've got to be able to do is, if we're going to do something, we spoke before about weight loss briefly, right? And it's funny, I've had people who have come in and they've got, jammed backs or hips or knees or whatever, and I'll give them one fascial mobilizer to do, and they go and do it, and they go, how come I'm losing weight? Well, there's an inflammatory response. And when we look at where the lymph nodes are behind the back of the knee and in the groins, there's a response that happens, right? But the biggest thing is if they can breathe and slow down their lifestyle for 1 minute, it's amazing how the body can heal, right? So the biggest thing for anything, if I'm using a roller, if I'm playing, is to breathe and let go. I don't count reps, that. I normally say put it on for 60 seconds or 50 seconds or 30 seconds, because if you're being told by a time frame, it's easier to focus on what you're doing rather than counting how many times I'm doing things. So the breathing is really important. Allow the tissue to tell you how it feels. Don't try and force it. Don't try and put more intensity in it if the body's going, oh, because if you're putting too much tension into fascia, remembering fascia is 6 to 10 times more proprioceptively enriched than what muscle is, it's going to light up a lot quicker than what muscle is. So you haven't got to put a lot of force into it. And remember, self-myofascial release, self-osteofascial release, self-positional activation, self-fascial, they're all tools.
Yep.
Neither of them are wrong or right. They're just tools.
Yep.
No different to vibration, weight training, no different to TRX, no different to Viper, loaded movements, whatever. They're just tools.
Got it. Well, we got time for, I think, one more. If you can show a self-isometric activation, something in there, that would be great. And then we'll wrap up.
Right. So what we're doing here, and a lot of this stuff is from the brilliance of Greg Roscoff that we've seen over the years. And when you look at what blokes like he do and bring to the industry, they're phenomenal. So from a Soma perspective, we've sort of gone and said, okay, let's look at the position of the body and let's try and activate a tissue. So we might just be what we call a longer endurance but a low force activation, because remembering that the body's just about patterns, right? Yep. So what we might do in this situation, Jace, is we might I might have my right arm on the wall, and I'm just going to bring the knee up to where it's comfortable. Actually, I'll use the outside knee. I'm just going to bring it up to where it's comfortable. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to create an intensity with my hand that's about a 10% intensity. Yep. And I'm going to hold for 5 seconds. 2, 3, 4, 5, and then relax. Now, the whole thing about this is big toe, little toe, heel of the foot I'm standing on, even weight distribution. This shoulder's just nice and relaxed. Then I'm going to bring this knee up again, and you'll find it wants to come up a smidgen higher, and then I'm going to do the same thing again, 5 seconds. Good. And I would do, once again, a metric before I did this. So I might flex forward, or I might do a sit and reach, or whatever it may be.
Yep.
And what you'll find is that when you do that 5 times, you go back and do your metric, all of a sudden now you'll find there's a change in the ability for the pelvis to move.
Well, and it's funny too, because I remember, I went deep into Greg's courses and the MAT side. And then I got my hands on a book, but I call it kind of the one of the very first books that came out with regards to the importance of the TVA. It was by Hodges, Hall and Hides. And it was the segmental spinalization and therapeutic low back pain or something. And that's where Greg was saying low level isometrics, and then I read it there. That's kind of, I think, maybe have been one of the spots where he came is as low level isometrics in the muscle shortened position is what creates a better connection. I mean, it says something different. I'm just using that. As a paraphrase, but and they're just so powerful. And I want to give my hats off to Brad Thorpe, who's created the IsoFit. I've got one, and it's amazing what isometric exercises, do for people. Well, thanks again, man. And, before we go, I really want to just dive into, how people could find out more information about your Feel Soma course and what those are about.
We've just finished our brand new website with Feel Soma, which I'm really, really happy with, mate. It's a 2-prong approach. So we've got an educational side to the website, and we've got a program side. So we've got the Soma digital immersion, which they can do online. It'll be up in around about 2 weeks, where we'll run through and we'll look at the scientific rationale of what Soma is all about. So we'll look at why we look at the tissues and the way we do that. We'll identify the tissues and how we approach the tissues or engage the tissues, and what those tissues will do once you've actually engaged them with various types of applications like, rollers and movements and play and so forth. You'll come away understanding some techniques of how we can use rollers in different ways, and then some solutions in how we can take that in programming. We've also got our events, and our events are our face-to-face stuff. So for the time being, that'll be happening in Australia, probably New Zealand. Then you've got, corporate workshops. We do online stuff, as we all do. And then, of course, the programming's, Jace, the reason why we've gone into the programming side, it's more to help people who are now stuck at home to understand how they can approach things like, back issues, knee issues, ankle issues. So we can go into those areas and apply the Soma philosophy. So it's a really simple approach. It's really affordable. It's a once-off fee. It's not you continue to pay. Yep. Or you can go in and get a library that's a 12-month subscription. And then you've got basically a goal-based programming situation. So there's options for everyone. The beautiful thing is they get to experience it. They get to feel it. If they want to contact me, mate, please, contact me, or go to the website and hit the contact us button.
Yeah, and we'll put all that in there. So just to recap, the last thing you just talked about, the programming and stuff, is that for more of a general population, or is that more for a trainer or a higher end, health enthusiast?
So it's interesting because the movement programming is basically for everyone. Because Jace, as you and I both know, even the high-end trainers sometimes get to a stage where they get confused about what's happening in their body. So the movement programming is for everyone.
Got it.
The movement library, once again, it can be for everyone. It's basically all bands and all dumbbell movements. They're fundamental movements. But the interesting thing about that is if you're a personal trainer, a coach, if you're someone who's looking for more tools, perfect for you. If you're a person who wants to do some more movements at home and you're a bit bored of what you've got, perfect for them. So it hits everyone across the board, right?
Yeah. But really the courses but the Soma virtual course and the live course is a bit more geared towards a health and fitness professional or enthusiast.
What's been really funny is that, yes, you're right. We approach this saying, okay, let's go after the allied health professional or the health professional. But what we're really seeing more of is, and I guess it's because of the language we use and the way we identify the tissues, we're getting a lot more end users coming in, Chase, which has been great. People who are athletes, people who are weekend warriors, people who have been challenged with health issues, they're actually coming along, and it's actually been amazing just to see the results that they're getting. And the great thing is, because the language we use, as you well know, from a PTA global perspective, it's actually people friendly. It's not this scientific, technical based situation. So it's been fantastic to see the cross section of people who are coming through.
Man, that's great. Well, I can't thank you enough, and you've been a pleasure, and it's been so long since I've seen you, so it's great to see you. And I look forward to doing some more stuff, maybe getting you and Rod on at a later date as well at the same time.
That'd be great. I'd love it, Jason. Mate, thank you for what you're doing, for what you've done, and for where you continue to take this, because the whole thing about this industry of ours is really about the evolution and the humility of how we take the evolution through. So, with you exposing the people of our industry who have really changed how we apply and how we view things, it's just great for everyone, because it allows everyone to actually review where we've come from, where we're going to, and get to catch up again. Right, champion?
It's always about those mistakes, right? We don't want the other people to make the same mistakes we made, but we learn a lot from them. That's all good fun, man. Well, thanks again, man, and you have a great day.
Thanks, champion. Stay well, mate.